So welcome to Module 2. You'll start examining the textbook this week. Hopefully you've begun looking at it, and we'll focus on the basic knowledge of sociology here. As I said in the last, you may not have taken a sociology class, so this may be a refresher, but especially we're going to focus on gender with this particular chapter. Gender's all around it. We see it, we hear it, we face it, the images of it, we assume we know what it is. And this course is helping you to explore it at a different level, hopefully, and how society interacts. So as we start to look at this, we're going to start thinking about it in different ways. That we know that sex is biological, that we're predetermined with chromosomes of X's and O's, as we call them, in the place, and one makes us female, one makes us male. That there are genital differences and things that come into place. So how exactly is gender then a social construct? That's part of what we're exploring now. And as we move forward to that, you'll start seeing what goes on. So let's look at a brief summary put together on the chapter here. So our goals, right, are to learn about gender in the world around us. And when we're talking about gender, we're talking about male and female, but we're talking about much more than that as well. And the understanding of how we see gender and how we define gender, and is there more than just two genders? Part of that is the arguments in the videos that you'll be watching as we move forward. Where goals are to recognize that gender is a social factor. It is collectively created and sustained. In other words, we're coming back to that social construct. We look at race, and we know that biologically there is no difference based on race. It's only a matter of the skin color. And if we look at DNA, our DNA may match someone who has entirely different skin characteristics than we do more closely than someone of the same skin characteristics. But we create it, and it makes a difference in society. Recognizing that gender has a social factor helps us understand what the issues are and the social problems that might go with it. It recognizes that gender is not just an individual attribution. When my students are in my intro class, I have them make a I am list. And you may have done this in psychology as well. I am. What am I? In the process of looking at myself. If I'm looking from Cooley's theory, as I mentioned before, that looking glass self, can I define who I am? I am a professor, a mother, a wife, all of those things, all of those roles coming into place. I am a woman. Gender becomes part of our identity. It sees who we are in that process, along with our statuses, and it becomes involved and enwrapped in those social roles. So identifying gender. Think about it when you walk down the street. Can you identify everyone's gender? Can you tell what they are or who they are or what they've been? You know, gender is not always easy to see. Has someone's gender ever been unclear or ambiguous to you? We're pretty good at gender attributions, long hair, right? Wearing a dress, where it's come into place. It is important in this course, throughout it, as you start working in the text and you start working on the assignments, that you start seeing gender involves more than identifying the gender around you, but it reveals those invisible ways with gender works. Yeah, like water to fish, gender is all around us, and we take for granted, we understand it. We take gender for granted. But there are many issues that need to be explored within those waves that those fish are swimming through. So what's a social construction of reality? A social construction of reality helps us to develop our gender vision. So what we need to see is the world in which we live is a social creation, that we create families and we bring them together and we look at that piece of society coming at us. We look at this social exploration and how we learn. We see all of these things coming together and they create what's right. Let's explore some of those issues. When I look at family settings, and we expect people to be married if they are cohabitating. Now, that's really changed in society today, but many families will still hold to that. I have a friend who was going on vacation with his family, and he wanted to take his partner, his significant other, a female, with him along, but because he's not married, his siblings were very disturbed. And said, this is a bad example for our children, for you to be, uh, bringing her along and not be married to her. And it's not acceptable, and we don't want her along. Now, who says we have to marry to have relationships? The world's changed a great deal. You see, the world creates this social condition, and it comes into place. Now, culture could be part of this as well, couldn't it? Could be their religious background tying to it, but culture provides us those categories for organizing the world and creating reality. And it could be that in his culture, his family's culture, having a significant person in your life isn't part of that unless it's tied to marriage. So how's that for gender? When we start thinking about this social construction of reality? Well, who plays what roles? What culture comes into place? When I've worked with Hispanic families as a social worker, there is culture in there and who is control. And we'll talk about some of those significant differences. And we see that pattern of machismo, that men are to be in charge of the family, though often women are by controlling in a different manner. The Thomas Principle. If people define the situations are real, they're real in their consequences. And so we can see the reality of race in the 19th and 20th century. Slavery, science, social policy sustained the ideology that biologically inferiority of the African Americans, which have now been rejected. Again, we'll talk about that issue of DNA, that there isn't a difference out there based on the construction of our molecules. In fact, if I need a kidney, I'm just as likely to be able to get one from another race as I am from my own. So you can see that we create this. You can see other ways besides race that have been created. As far as looking at gender, we can see that women were considered, their brains were considered smaller and not able to think on such high levels. Yes, it's very interesting. As we create this as a reality, it becomes a reality and changes someone's life. So think about the fact that women may be told that they can't do math, or men can't be good nurturing parents or be the main caregiver for. We create an environment that discourages that fact that ourselves can do what we want in the process. So understanding social construction. Once we understand the way in which the world is socially constructed, now there's biological pieces going on here. That's part of it that makes gender so difficult. But we can see that the social construction here, we can begin to see how the world is shaped. Okay, so we know the statistics that women are more likely to have lower educations across the world, that about 60% of women become uneducated. They're more likely to be enslaved in the process as well. They're more likely to be abused and controlled. And part of that can be shaped by the social construction that women are not equal in that power. Or, again, Remember, every time we look at anything related to one sex, we need to look at the similar implications that occur for the other. So the critical evaluation of cultural categories we use to make sense of the world are important for us to understand and where they came from and if they are tied to reality. So the approach to understanding understanding gender, we look methods for helping us to see that social construction. We look at the historical comparison, and we can see that issue, as our book points out, through race. We can see the cross-cultural comparison and the variation of racial categories. As I mentioned in the previous video, we've changed that measure of race, or it may not have been this course, but we change our categories for race every time we collect the census, because that social construct of what it is has changed within society in that 10-year period of time. So we can look at what's going on. We can look at the variation of how we consider what's family. Gender and intersectionality. Well, intersectionality is the theoretical orientation and frame for activism. It helps us see the way people in different categories experience gender different. There's a variation by race, ethnicity, social class, and our sexuality. And whether we're homosexual, heterosexual, or bisexual, transsexual, in that process, it varies on how we experience gender. It makes us aware that we do not experience our identities separately, that there's something that comes into place, and there's those roles into place. So sex or gender, what's the difference? Sex is biological. It is those biological pieces that come together that can be measured as male or female. And gender, it means the social meaning that are attributed to the sexual differences, the social and cultural focus. So when we look at some of these arguments, we have to make sure whether we're arguing about gender or arguing about sex. Now, cisgender is where sex and gender categories match. Is my gender the same as my sex? Am I female biologically? Am I female as gender? Or do they mismatch? And so we have to look at what the difference is. Scholars have different ways of sensing the relationship between sex and gender. There is the biological approach, and there's the strong constructivist perspective that gender is truly constructed by society. So the biological approach acknowledges that social construction of gender has existed over time. They recognize that biological reality of male and female body limit the social construction, and they believe in sexual dysmorphism. In other words, not all people are just of one sex. So we see that in place. Sexual dysmorphism, people can be sorted into two categories of male and female, and gender assignment is process of that sorting. Now, that looks at the biological, but we do have some problems with that, don't we? So how do we distinguish who is male and female? And think back to when you're looking at those people on the street. Can you identify from their bodies, from their facial features? You can see that the clear reality here of their differences. What we're seeing is cultural genitalia describing what is sex. And yet we know that biology is not perfect, is it? Not everyone is born with that perfect location. So the strong social construction approach looks at the social that sex and gender are socially constructed, and the evidence then is gender and bodies that intersects that there's the social construction of sex, that there are people that are transgendered, and we look at the historical and cultural approaches. So as you start to explore this, you're going to see this fight back and forth between these particular issues. Now, so why study gender? Does gender matter? Gender matters because it influences life's chances and the places we go. Social institutions are gendered, and can the questioning gender include the scientific approach? So the key goals for this course and this text, and this is why the text is so vital in any online course, but especially this one, as you start to look at it, is to understand how gender is socially constructed in the global and historical context. We'll look at some of that history. We'll look at other disciplines. We'll explore how it moves forward, and to debunk the assumption that it's what is normal and abnormal. You know, as my friend who wants to take his girlfriend along, who they don't cohabitate, but they have a relationship, is considered abnormal by his family. Do we debunk that in this day and age of changing relationships? And I'm talking about a friend who's in his 30s, whose son is going to college, not being allowed to make his choices as part of that family. We recognize that gender is not simply a means to draw social distinction, but it's also a matter of inequality that comes into place. And it changes our position of how we can get places in society and where we fit in. Remember, we're always looking at that inequality that can work one way or the other as we start to explore this. So what are you going to do this week? So pretty much what I've written below your video is covered within the PowerPoints. You'll notice that the PowerPoints I put together actually have more as a summary of your textbook to get you there. But we're going to get started on why we're looking at these issues. So the first thing you're going to do after reading your text and watching this video is watch a quick video on gender as social construct. And this gentleman gives the argument back and forth. I want you to think about that and how it moves forward. Then you'll move forward to your discussion board for the week. And again, questions are not available at the end of this chapter. So your question for you for the week, if you choose to answer it, and remember you need to do at least 10 of them throughout the course, is what does gender mean to you? How does the vocabulary of gender shape the social construction in your life? And how might you explore that gender outside the social construction? Remember, as you write on this, make sure you cite your sources, make sure you cite sources to back up your statements, and that should be 2 to 3 pages, double-spaced, turned in through the Dropbox. So, your discussion board for the week, if you notice, So it popped to the wrong discussion board in a class over 2 years ago. So here you are with the right discussion board. Why should we care about gender? Are you beginning to see gender differently, or have you been examining gender throughout your life? Explain how you learned about gender and how you're seeing it and what you've experienced. Looking forward to a great discussion this week. Let me know if you have questions. You have my office hours, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you.